Scottish people that there you go, it's recording in progress. It's the settled will of the Scottish people that we should be European and be members of the European Union. But we also have a choice about how that comes about. And it's very clear in talking to our membership is that they want to discuss how we should go about this. But one thing that is also evident to me, and it came to me when I was doing an interview with a newspaper, it was saying, how does the European movement in Scotland bridge this gap between those who want to join Europe via the independence route and those who want to do it through our continued membership of the UK? As pro-Europeans, one of the key values that we stand for is pragmatism and understanding and agreement and consensus. And so therefore, I know that David Gow, who's behind, who has put together this webinar, and with our great speakers, Stephen and Eddie, one of the really important things about this is that this was going to be a respectful discussion about how we fix this. How do we get back into Europe, and what are the pros and what are the cons? And I'd be particularly interested in hearing from those who are supporting a particular point of view, what are the difficulties that they see, and what are the responsibilities that they might have to take into account if we're going via the independence route or via the UK. Well, anyway, with that in mind, I'm going to hand over now to David Gow, the chairman, and he is going to introduce our great speakers for tonight, Stephen Gethins and Eddie Barnes. Over to you, David Gow.
Thank you very much, David. And as you say, either way, whatever route we choose, it's not going to be easy. I think everybody can agree on that. It isn't a given, and it won't be a doddle, unfortunately, in a way. Anyway, I mean, as we know that Brexit is now, I think there was that poll recently this year which showed that I think out of Britain's 650 constituencies, all but one are now negative. Brexit is now a negative event for them, and anti-Brexit sentiment in Scotland is much higher than it was even back in 7 years ago, when we, as you know, we voted 62% to remain, and I think we would now vote around our mid-70s to do so. So, and we know this had a disastrous effect on growth, investment, farming, food, fisheries, labour force, health service, not forgetting Horizon, the research program, Erasmus, the student, the youth exchange program. There are, for us, and I think generally speaking, very few positives, if any at all. So, in that sense, it should be a kind of slam dunk, the argument for rejoin. But as David, our chair, set out, how do we actually go about it, and how should we rejoin? So should we rejoin as a independent state, an independent member state, or should we join as part of the UK? Or other kind of variants? No, there are probably other variants at all. But anyway. Let's discuss all that, and we're lucky to be joined, as David said, by two prominent people to have this conversation. It's not a confrontation, it's a conversation. So Stephen Gethins, who's going to lead off, is Professor of Practice in International Relations at St Andrews Uni and an EMIS executive member. He's the former SNP MP for North East Fife and a spokesperson on Europe and international affairs in the Commons. And he sat on the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He's also a member, I think, of the board or advisory board of the Scottish Council on Global Affairs. Eddie Barnes is the campaign director of Our Scottish Future, which is a group or think tank set up by Gordon Brown. Very interestingly enough, he is, of course, also a former aide, a spokesperson at one point for the former Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, and a former political editor at the Scotsman. And he's advised UK prime ministers on the reform of the UK state. So anyway, so it's going to be a very interesting conversation. And Stephen, would you kick off with your take on how Scotland should rejoin the EU?
Yeah, thanks for that, David, and thanks to EMIS for the opportunity to be able to have this conversation. It's such an important conversation, and it sort of goes to the heart of many aspects of our discussion and debate about Scotland's future at the moment. It's also good to have the opportunity to have a discussion, and I know Eddie and I might have different views on this, but Eddie is an incredibly thoughtful colleague who, and I for one, am be really interested in hearing some of those perspectives. So thank you to Emma for arranging this, because I think this is a discussion that we need, regardless of one's politics, or actually if you're sitting there and trying to figure it all out. Let me give a perspective from somebody that's pro-independence about the question of Scotland rejoining the European Union. I mean, at the moment, of course, independence is the only way back in that's being advocated by a major political party in the UK at the moment. But that apart, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the context, because I think there's always a danger in politics from all political parties and of all political persuasions, of refighting old battles. I think that Brexit has changed fundamentally the debate and discussion around the question of independence. It's reshaped the debate we're having. It's reshaped the choice of different futures that are available. And I also noticed, as somebody, I mean, not so much in the past couple of years whilst I've been at the university, but somebody who was active in politics previously, I noticed a reshaping of the kind of discussions that you were having with people on doorsteps. And the great thing about active politics is you can often be in your goldfish bowls, but when you chap on doors and speak to people, it gives you a context and an insight that you sometimes miss. I think, first of all, Brexit as a political project isn't going very well. Now, you'd expect us to say that in here, but I think, David, as you illustrated earlier on, the polling evidence suggests that the UK being out of step, the cost of living crisis being exacerbated by us sitting outside the European Union. And I think that is reflected in the opinion polls. And I'm still astonished at the way that this hasn't cut through to being advocated for by major political parties who campaign on a UK-wide basis. Let's look at the politics. The politics is that cost of living crisis is the biggest issue that politicians face at the moment. It's the big thing that they get asked about. We know that from opinion polls. We know that from, if you speak to them when they speak to people in the streets. It's been made worse by Brexit. So that changes the debate. Security, and this is an area close to my own heart. Another big concern, and another way the world has changed both by Brexit and since Brexit, is, of course, the extension of Russia's full-scale military assault on Ukraine that started or was exacerbated in February last year. We now look at pan-European security. For me, the twin pillars of European security sit with NATO and the European Union. The European Union that the UK left and that Scotland would seek to rejoin, or the UK would seek to rejoin, is not the same European Union that we left. And I think it's really important that we always talk about Europe or the European Union as an evolving institution. That conflict has changed it. And actually, I'd reference, if anybody gets time to go and look at it, a speech that Ursula von der Leyen gave in the aftermath of the fall of Kabul, which is even more relevant now, about the EU as a security actor. So we are secure not just in terms of our military capability, we become secure in terms of our energy security, our food and drink security, all these areas that are provided for by the European Union. Also, let me talk about a little bit in terms of the independence argument. I think previously, say back in 2014, one could have argued that if Scotland had sought independence, and for that, to have had in European parlance internal enlargement, to paraphrase the late great Sir Neil McCormack, that you would see that almost Scotland leaving the UK and becoming a member of the EU in its own right would have been an exception. Well, nowadays, the exceptional position is that of the UK. If you look at the rest of Europe is coming closer together. Ukraine is fighting a war, trying to get into Europe. You're about to see expansion again. And actually, in many ways, independence and rejoining the EU becomes a more mainstream or even boring option, with the UK staying outside as being the more exceptional and riskier option. So that changes the way that we can debate and discuss, and changes the frame. Another part of it is that, and I'm going to come on to the challenges just briefly in a moment for those who are pro-independence. We have the challenge around, we look at all of our neighbours who are members of the European Union of a similar size, Ireland, Denmark, Belgium, even those further east, Slovakia, Slovenia, etc., who are doing better in terms of their economic performance, their educational performance, productivity, fairness, all these areas as members of the European Union. And there's a significant question for those who are pro-union to say, well, how can Scotland thrive outside the European Union? You know, every country that has joined the EU got wealthier. The one country that left the EU got poorer. So I think that this has changed things, that there's a significant challenge. As for the challenges for those of us who are pro-independence, I think that's fair. I do think, first of all, before I go into the challenges, I think the question of an Eastern versus a Western enlargement are very different. You know, Scotland's met the rules in terms of the rule of law, much of the acquis communautaire. That being said, one of the challenges will be the longer that we're outside the EU, the greater divergence, of course, because the UK seeks to diverge in many areas, creating barriers. The other one will, of course, as people will mention, be that of the border. And of course, there's a question around the border. And Scotland will be one of the areas, if Scotland becomes independent, rejoins the EU, we'll have that external border with the rest of the UK. But when your neighbour is making a very, very poor economic decision, as unfortunate, I'd love it if England and Wales rejoined the European Union as well. But when they're making that bad economic decision that's making us poorer, I think Scots have the option of rejoining the European Union, but we need to look at that border and making that as smooth as possible. And I would love to see England and Wales come closer. And I think it would be very difficult for England and Wales, who will then be surrounded by, on 4 sides, by the European single market rather than just in 3 sides at the moment. But there's work to be done. I know I'm skirting over so many of these things, but we've only got a certain amount of time, David. There are other challenges. One of them is, one of the challenges for Scotland will be institution building. So if you join the European Union, I don't think there'll be a challenge in terms of the rule of law and the acquis, but I think there will be a challenge in terms of institutions that you need to have to join as an independent member state that you're expected to have in place. And one of the things I'd like to see the Scottish Government do, for example, might be an audit of the kind of institutions that you need to have in place in order to deliver EU membership as quickly as possible. The record for joining, incidentally, between putting in your membership application and joining, I think, was Finland at 2 years and 9 months, but the Finns did a lot of work prior to that. And finally, is the Brussels office big enough and well equipped enough? Now, there's a fantastic team in Brussels who do fantastic work in terms of engaging with the European Union. That will always be the case, regardless of whether or not Scotland's independent or not. That remains an important relationship. But if you aspire to join, are you investing enough in that Brussels office? And do you have a significant amount of expertise out in that office? But again, that will take official resource, because there's a lot the Scottish Government can be doing right now to ease membership of the European Union in the event of independence. And finally, I'll leave you with this thought. I wonder if 100 years from now, we're looking back at history, and it's difficult, but this is, we all have all of us want a better world. If you're pro-union, pro-independence, you want a better world. And I wonder if 100 years from now, Scotland's independent and it's a member of the European Union, if people will put down the moment of independence, not 2016, at the moment of the EU referendum, but rather in 1973, when people in Scotland had the choice of 2 very different unions, one that respects member states, where member states work together collaboratively based on treaty, and the other, which is very much an outdated union, which is remaining part of the United Kingdom, that's taken Scotland out of the EU against its will, that delivers parties it didn't vote for and policies it didn't vote for. So I wonder if 100 years from now, if Scotland's independent, people will see that moment that independence became inevitable as being when the UK joined the European Union, rather than when the UK left the European Union, given that choice of unions. And I think I've taken slightly longer than I should have done, David, but there was a lot of ground to cover. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was, and thanks very much for ending with a very interesting, what they call, conceit, or a provocation at the end. it all started back in 73, including independence. I think, you know, you made some very interesting points there, although I think there's plenty more to explore, to put it, so it's, can I just, but whilst I'm here, just before I hand over to Eddie, can I just remind you, I think Bill's already put it, a friend of his put it in the chat, but actually, can you, when it comes to the question and answer session, can you please put your questions in the Q&A channel and not in the chat channel? That'd be very helpful to me personally. Okay, fine. Thanks very much. Right, Eddie, follow that. Now it's up to you to set out the case. You know, as Stephen said, neither of the two parties likely to form the UK government, the Labour Party nor the Conservative Party, think that rejoin is an option anytime at all. And they're not even prepared to consider rejoining the single market and the customs union. So where does that leave pro-Europeans like yourselves, like yourself? And you're muted.
Thank you very much. Can I just first of all just echo Stephen's point and just thank you for inviting me to speak to you today and in this kind of forum as well. You know, I come up with this as somebody that wants to see the whole of the United Kingdom together, rejoining eventually the European Union. But I can also see that if ever Scotland were to become independent, then I think you know, it would be made easier and would be beneficial for all of us if the rest of the United Kingdom were also in the European Union. So I think there is huge common ground here, and it's good to speak in that context. The question you've asked us to discuss today is what route and how Scotland might rejoin the European Union, either independent or as part of the United Kingdom. I'd like to be optimistic, but I think I also want to be realistic. And I think the basic answer, certainly in the short to medium term, and I think this applies to whether Scotland is in or out of the Union, is frankly with extreme difficulty. As you say, David, we're in a position at the moment where neither Labour nor the Conservatives, one of which will form the administration next year after the general election, are going to contemplate rejoining the European Union. And I think that is a reality we just have to accept. I mean, the optimist in me would point to the fact that, as you I think also alluded to, that polling does show at the moment that a majority of people across the United Kingdom now believe we were wrong to leave the European Union, and only a third believe the decision was the right one. At the same time, we've got people like Michel Barnier going around TV studios saying that Britain can apply to rejoin the EU today. But given the political context, given the fact that I don't actually think a second referendum, if ever one were to be held, would necessarily at the moment come out in the positive. And also looking at the wider context, I don't really see the EU up for renegotiating with us just now, not when it's got many other priorities in the agenda. For example, if I was an EU official just now, I'd kind of wonder what point there is discussing re-entry if you knew that the Conservatives were still opposed to membership, given that, you know, you could spend 4 to 5 years agreeing a deal only to see it torn up if the Tories were to get back in. So for all those reasons, as you say, David, I think we have to accept that in the short term and the medium term, rejoining the European Union at the moment as part of the United Kingdom is simply not likely to happen. I think the same applies with independence. I don't want to kind of litigate the arguments too much there, but I think the same issue applies with regard to independence. Leave aside the fact of whether Scotland would ever actually vote to leave the United Kingdom. There are a series of obstacles that would have to be scaled if ever Scotland were to be accepted into the European Union. And moreover, I think the same issues that apply to the UK just now would apply to an independent Scotland in a world where the EU is focused elsewhere at the moment on other priorities, on the threat from Russia, on Ukraine, and so on. I think sometimes we should recognise that people that don't live here perhaps aren't as obsessed about our own domestic priorities as we are. And I think we should probably both accept that the UK and Scotland are second-order issues. in the EU just now, and therefore it's unlikely to be coming to the top of the agenda. So I think we have to have some blunt realism for when we talk about rejoining, whether in or out of the Union, and accept that in the short to medium term, it's probably not going to happen. But I said I would try and be optimistic as well as realistic. And I do believe there is cause for optimism on the way ahead for the whole of the United Kingdom. Firstly, I think the Windsor Agreement signed earlier this year has at least put relations between the UK and the EU on a reasonably stable footing at last, although undoubtedly there is a long, long way to go on that front. Secondly, it's clear, as I said at the start, there is strong backing now for a closer relationship with the EU. Polling by the Tony Blair Institute earlier this summer found that fully 80% of people in Britain now say that they would like to see a deeper relationship with the European Union after the next election. Thirdly, I think the kind of jeopardy of Brexit from the European perspective has, if you like, subsided. Given how bad it's been for us, it's quite notable now that not even Vox or even the AfD in Germany or Giorgia Meloni in Italy is talking about leaving the EU. And so the systemic threat of Brexit to the EU has subsided, and that potentially opens up the prospect of the EU side being more flexible, perhaps, in its continuing negotiations with the United Kingdom. And finally, I think, as Stephen alluded to, the shock of war in Europe has, I think, concentrated minds across the continent on what we all have in common and how we rely upon each other. It is hard to kind of maintain the kind of Brexit culture war when you see people in Ukraine dying. And I think that has at least demonstrated to all of us, whether we're leaders or Brexiteers, that there is far more that binds us in this continent than separates us. So I think all those factors together suggest that there is some fertile soil, if you like, that is now to build on. So for the pro-European movement in Scotland and the UK, for me, I think the first task is to stop thinking about this in kind of binary, polarized terms. As David Lidington, the former European minister, put it recently, we do need to get out of the trenches that we dug in 2016. And I think a better way forward is to think about the steps that most of us, if not all of us, and by that I mean Leave, Remain, and in Scotland, No and Yes, can travel forward a little together on this issue. Perhaps a better approach is to work towards building that closer relationship that most of us want, and then allowing the logic of Britain's place in Europe to emerge. And if I may, I think there are kind of parallels here, I've thought about this, with the way the SNP has actually pursued the case of independence over the last 20 years or so. In other words, the graduates route. I remember an SNP friend once putting it to me back in the day when independence was, at that time, seemed like a complete fantasy, that the idea was to put rocks in the stream so that with each rock, you laid down the path to independence on the other side of the bank grew a little shorter. So devolution was one rock, obviously more powers for the Parliament for others. And as I think it was Professor James Mitchell put it, the idea was that one day Scotland would wake up and realise that it was pretty much already independent and take the short hop to the other side of the bank. Well, that work, I guess, is still obviously ongoing. But what it feels to me is that what we're best doing as pro-Europeans in Scotland is to attempt something similar. So rather than leaping for rejoin and full EU membership at a time when it is simply not feasible is pointless. A better task, it seems to me, is the more gradualist route, to put rocks in the stream. So if you're pro-European, that starts with supporting MPs at Westminster next year of a more pro-European bent. It means pushing for more bilateral agreements, which align the UK with the EU on goods and veterinary agreements and so on. It means campaigning for a new mobility agreement that permits creatives and artists and students to travel freely to and from the continent. And maybe a few years down the line, it means an association agreement on things like security and energy and trade. Will that lead to full EU membership? Well, it may or it may not. I don't think any of us can say, but it does make it more likely. And it will bring Brexit supporters with us rather than alienating them still further. I think it will improve trust between the UK and Europe, which is desperately needed. It will mean that once time has passed and circumstances have changed, that the step to rejoining the EU or becoming an associate member of some sort is made easier. Now, I do accept in conclusion that this isn't the way forward for everybody in Scotland, because inevitably this route will take time. And I accept too that given the experience of the last 7 years, that keeping faith with political progress in Scotland may be seen as by many as a mug's game. But I do think that this patient approach is frankly the best approach and the best option that there is. It's true to say I think Scotland is a long way from rejoining the EU, but I think that through small, patient, practical steps to forge a closer relationship with the EU, we may end up in a position sooner than we think where those gradual actions make EU membership, if not inevitable, then certainly feasible once more. And I'll end there, given I've already spoken for far too long. Thanks very much.
No, you haven't. That's absolutely fine. That was really very interesting indeed. I could talk for hours now, and I'm sure you two could as well. But anyway, we're going to open up soon to the to our audience. There's already, I can see, 12 questions down. So I better get going. But what I'd like to ask is, I noticed, Eddie, you eschewed any mention of single market and customs union, so you don't see that as a viable step, immediate step. I don't know what if you could justify that or talk about that at all. And the same would go with Stephen. And another question which I have is, what do you think, if people say in Scotland who've been, who always wanted to stay in Europe, certainly for the last 50 more years, see that, there may even be a fast track for Ukraine to join, the Western Balkans could be, they're going to step up the negotiations. I mean, there was a big long piece in the FT this week last week about, how would the EU cope with it as a group as a union of 35 or even maybe 38, and then we'd have this strange kind of island nation called the UK, or even actually probably by that time just the Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, not Northern Ireland and England, as a kind of like, as Stephen said, a very strange outlier country, So how do you think that would go down?
So on the first, I'm not, so I can speak only personally from my own opinions now, but on the single market customs union issue, I mean, it immediately just takes you into rule takers, not rule makers territory. And I think that is not, frankly, an option that appeals to me. I mean, I would like to see us as full members of the European Union for the very reasons that we all, I suspect, on this call agree, because it puts us around the table and gives us the opportunity to make the rules and benefit from single market access and being part of a customs union. And therefore, I don't see the attractions, even if it does help our economy, to simply being, as has been discussed, sitting by the facts in London and being told what our economy can and can't do. But I think that does relate to the second half of your point. And you mentioned Ukraine, and you mentioned the countries in Eastern Europe now discussing it, because I may be accused of cakeism here, but I think cakeism is kind of coming back a little bit. Ukraine has changed the dial a little bit. The fact that it is now accession is happening, the fact that this is being fast-tracked, certainly from the kind of things I'm reading and listening to, you begin to get a sense that perhaps, as I say, somewhere down the line, this isn't in any time soon, but somewhere down the line, if the UK has got to a position where it has restored trust with the rest of the European Union, where it has demonstrated that it wants to maintain and develop a closer relationship, it's a question at the moment, is there, to use a phrase, a third way? Is there some kind of association agreement, some kind of deal down the line that may not be full EU membership to begin with, but is at least something that is more than the awful deal that we have right now?
So, Stephen, what would you think about that? I mean, and also, it's kind of related to that kind of, could one have a kind of, as I say, I mean, that awful phrase, variable geometry, has raised its head again,
Yeah, I know it has. I mean, the UK.
That's about different parts of the EU having different kind of, different, going so far with policies and allowing other countries, like a core of countries, for example, to go ahead with completely, really almost like a kind of economic federalism, for example, things like that. So
I'll come to that. I mean, because the UK kind of had that as a member. Let's not forget, given the number of opt-outs it had, and given the sort of deals that were done. I remember Philip Hammond saying, look, the UK's got a pretty good deal, which meant that when David Cameron went to renegotiate the deal, he didn't come back with very much. He was criticised for that at the time, but there weren't really that many other places to go that might have kept the right-wing Eurosceptic side of his party. In terms of, but I'm going to come back to that on the single market and customs union. I mean, even though Scotland voted to remain in the EU, and that was something that when I was in Parliament, it was something that we're quite keen to promote, as you'd understand, for understandable reasons. Remember that the SNP and other elements offered in the Scottish Parliament actually voted for remaining part of the single market and the customs union. There was the document, which I still think is worth a read, worth going back to, Scotland's Place in Europe, that was produced by the Scottish Government critically. And I think this was important. When they produced that document, they did put together a panel of whisper experts, people that academics, former judges, former officials, members of other political parties, to try and bring something together. So that was offered as a compromise, if you like. Now, I think that was a compromise. I think Eddie's absolutely right. I think that if you're in the single market and the customs union, you're sort of, you are a rule taker, because the single market is so important. In my opinion, the single market is one of the greatest achievements in Europe since the Second World War. It has built peace, it has built prosperity, it has built opportunity for generations. So you can see why the EU defends it so jealously. And when I say the EU, I mean all of its member states. They see its value. So I think that if you're in the single market and customs union, you're as close as damn it. So you might as well be a member. On the other side, and I should also say that another reason why single market and customs union was so attractive was the Treasury did an analysis. Now, I was allowed in to go look at that analysis. The Treasury analysis showed that every version of Brexit was damaging to the economy and to every sector, into every sort of major sector in the UK, and that's been borne out. We've seen that now, what happened. The least bad option was membership of the single market and customs union. And if we think back to Nick, and I shamefully can't remember his name, but the compromise that was put forward, the Norway Plus model that was put forward, that still damaged the economy. It was still damaging because you were sitting outside. It wasn't as damaging as the other bits, the bits we have now, but it was still damaging. On the diverse, I think, the EU is a political beast. And I think people, and I've seen this in the debate time and time again, where they'll go, oh, rules say such and such and such and such. The EU has shown itself repeatedly to be a political beast. It finds political solutions to political problems. It did so with East Germany. It did so with Cyprus. I suspect that if the UK wanted to rejoin, or if Scotland voted to join, they would find political solutions. They always do, because that's the nature of the success of the EU. And that's why decision-making in treaties, it can be a bit messy, but it reflects the messiness of trying to bring together 27 sovereign and independent states to make agreements. So I think we'd most likely see something like that. And you see it in the way that the EU solves other problems, that you see messy compromises. One of my favorites was the Åland Islands, which is part of Finland, who independently have to vote whether or not they joined the EU. When they joined with Finland, as part of Finland, they even joined and were able to keep their duty free in that small archipelago in the Baltic Sea. So there are ways and means of doing this. It's a political beast, and it finds political compromises. That's why it's been so successful over the past 60, 70 years. David, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. Well, that's a fascinating, that's a little known fact, actually, I think, about the duty-free island there. Anyway, so we just move on to the questions now from the related to this from the audience. So Morag asks sort of yes for EU. What evidence exists to suggest the EU member countries and the EU itself would look favourably or otherwise on an application from an independent Scotland? And then she also wants to know if when Scotland applies to join, at what stage of the accession process could an association agreement, which you, Eddie, raised, be negotiated. What benefits could it bring pre-accession? There is a kind of related question as well, since we're going to, is from a Scott Cowie. Would it make sense for Scotland to campaign for UK-wide EU-friendly reforms, such as selective free movement of people? Or is that at all possible, even? Eddie, do you want to have a go? You're muted, like me.
Sorry. I think, look, I think, as I said in my opening comments, my kind of argument about a kind of gradualist way back into the European Union means that we should be focusing on areas which go with the grain of public opinion across the United Kingdom, which we now know is in favour of a deeper relationship with the European Union, and which seek to try, as I say, and bring people who support Brexit with us. I mean, I think this is really important. I mean, it's all very well saying, as I think Stephen mentioned the point, it's really important that we stop kind of, relitigating the arguments from 2016 and going back into those trenches. One of the most important things, it seems to me, over the next few years is convincing people who support Brexit that we are not trying to go back or undo something that they passionately and vehemently supported in. We're actually going to try and do something that we think is in the United Kingdom's interests, and and that includes Scotland with it. I'm opposed to Brexit, but I'm particularly opposed to this Brexit. This Brexit has been calamitous, and but at the same time as seeing that, I don't think that we can't just dismiss the fact that there are some ways of making Brexit work better, and in so doing, trying to kind of bring people with us. So I mentioned a few examples, and I think if there is a Labour government after next May or October, whenever it happens to be, these things will happen. I think the Irish border will effectively, be got rid of. These are things that we don't need EU agreement to do. We can just get on with and do now. When it comes to things like veterinary rules, regulation on food, we can align with the EU on all of these things. It's completely unnecessary that we have different regulations on these at the moment. We can take these small steps. We can talk about mobility agreements. We can sort out, the ridiculous, situation at the moment where our creatives and our others are finding it difficult to travel into the European Union. These are all things that I think Labour has said they want to do. Frankly, I think the Conservatives, and it's baffling to me why they don't want to kind of move on these things too, should be advocating too. And while that isn't, may not lead to the big bang of rejoining the European Union, it will at least start making things a little bit better and get Scotland, get the whole United Kingdom in a position where, as circumstances and as time changes, as time evolves, we're in a better position. I hope that, if that answers the question, if it doesn't.
Yeah. Stephen, what about rejoin au petit pas?
Well, I'll come on to rejoin, but I just want to pick up on just to follow on from
sure.
Eddie there, if I may, just because I think there's an important point, given that we're probably looking at a general election next year. I think firstly, Brexit's been disaster. It's down, all the stuff we know. The fact that we are now a generation, we have a generation of politicians who are now in a position whereby they're providing fewer opportunities for the young people who come after them than they themselves have had, which is, for me, was always one of the great rules of politics, that regardless of your politics, you want to create more opportunities than you yourself had, as well as all the economic stuff. So I think you'll see it. I think my view is that given how damaging Brexit has been, no political party should be letting, if you like, anti-European parties off the hook. And every general election gives one the opportunity as a voter, as an organisation, but also for the political parties who are pro-European, that opportunity to continue to make the case. And I don't think they'll stop making that case. I also think that, we talked about the UK, having a less bad deal. I think it's always in Scotland's best interests that the rest of the UK is as close to to Europe as possible, the rest of Europe as possible, because, you know, I'm pro-independence, but I don't want to see our biggest neighbours, you know, I've got family, friends, all the rest of it, committing this appalling act of self-harm, in it, you know, any more than I would have liked to have seen it happen in places like Ireland or Belgium or elsewhere. And actually, I think you will always see, for example, SNP or other pro-European parties vote for incremental changes. It would be very difficult, you know, let's say, hypothetically, Labour came in and then removed the veterinary checks that Eddie just referred to. I think most pro-European parties, regardless of their view in the constitution, would seek to work on that. And there's also there's also the politics of this as well, which is the SNP will, I dare say, because Brexit is so unpopular, continue to take the political opportunity of making Labour feel as uncomfortable as possible. Now, Eddie and I have both been involved in politics, and that's fair game. You know, that's part of it. And I don't think you'll see the sort of the SNP let the Labour Party off the hook because it's not fair. I think that's going to be part and parcel of our political debate. And look, the same way it'd go if Labour saw an opportunity in this regard, I'm sure they'd be the first ones to grab it as well. On the other question, so an association and letting Scotland is, and firstly, the question of Scottish entry is in so many ways complex, but in so many ways straightforward. So people mention the Spanish, you know, both Partido Popular and the socialist foreign ministers, governments, you know, have always made it clear that if Scotland secedes in a legal and constitutional way, they will, of course, have absolutely no problem with Scottish membership of the EU, because, of course, Scotland's constitutional position is very different from that in Spain, because the Spanish constitution, rightly or wrongly, it's not for me to say, sees itself as one indivisible entity. So actually, the Spanish have always been quite clear on that, as have other European governments. But then critically, that relies upon with independence. You know, I think doing so in a legal and constitutional way, which is something that the SNP have always advocated and others have always advocated for as well. So I think that letting in is less of a problem than maybe it's sometimes made out to be. I think the problems come on the other side that I indicated: institution building, ensuring you met the acquis communautaire, and the questions of divergence the longer that you are out. However, if Scotland became independent, I think the polls suggest this, let's say hypothetically, Scotland's independent. My view is that if Scotland becomes independent, you're in the aftermath, the afterglow of a referendum. A lot of that will have been driven by Brexit if the pro-independence side are successful. Scotland. So as such, I think that whichever government was around in the aftermath of independence would be honour bound, and actually democratically bound, to seek membership of the EU as quickly as possible. Now, part of that might be an association agreement, so you can bring down some of the more unnecessary checks. There would also be the question of further negotiations with London, because if Scotland was independent and seeking membership of the EU, that would, whether right-wing Conservatives like it or not, change the rest of the UK's relationship with the European Union as well, because, you know, England would then have a land border with the European Union, or with a potential European Union state. I think association agreements and some of these talks also let you overcome some of the more simple stuff, you know, getting into Horizon Europe very quickly, rejoining Erasmus quickly, trying to bring down trade barriers where you possibly can quickly, attendance, you know, observer status in the European Parliament, which sometimes happens. And if you look back, you will see there's plenty of precedent for the way in which aspiring member states sort of eased themselves into European Union membership. Because I think at that stage, if it was clear that Scotland was going to join the EU, I think it would be in the interests of everybody for that to be as smooth a process as possible. I'm not saying that Scotland would get an easier ride than some of our Western European neighbours, but I think it'd be in everybody's best interests to look at where you could reduce barriers and where you could look to reduce friction, because that would have been at the heart of the reasons why Scotland voted for independence at that moment.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Yes, that is very interesting about the association agreement first. Eddie raised the question there about the Irish dimension and about the Irish border effectively disappearing. And Kenny Gilchrist would go a bit further and ask the question: would a united Ireland not change the dynamics of today's discussion? I mean, a lot of people think, some people think that if the that the UK will change quite dramatically, or quite significantly, because there could be soon, at some point, relatively soon, within the island of Ireland, a border poll about whether the 6 counties wish to rejoin the 26 and become the 32. So would that change the situation? In other words, would it give a huge boost to both pro-EU sentiment in Britain and particularly in Scotland?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, I'm trying to think about it.
Yeah, because it's a really good question. And it'll be interesting hearing Eddie's response. It's a really good question. I think, first of all, I actually think, look, it is not for me to comment on Irish politics. I'm not well placed to comment on Irish politics or Northern Irish politics, but let me make an observation based on discussions with people in Northern Ireland and Ireland. I actually think the question of Irish reunification, which may well happen, which Brexit makes more likely, is actually in some ways a little bit more complex in Scottish independence. Now that sounds like quite a controversial thing to say, but I'll tell you why. I mean, Scotland and England have I think have got one of the longest established borders in the world, with much fewer crossing points. I think there are now more crossing points between the UK and the EU than there are in the EU's entire eastern border, because there are so many, because that is such a, given history, it's such a complex border, whereas the Scottish border there are much fewer, vastly fewer crossing points. So I think that the Irish question is complex. I think there are lessons in the sense that the debate that's only just starting in Dublin is one of, well, even if people vote for Irish reunification, what do you do about losers' consent? And actually, I was reading a comment by a former colleague of mine online, a guy called Neil Stewart today, talking about if there's one lesson for those of us who are pro-independence from Brexit, well, there are many lessons, but one of them is we know what it felt like when there was a political project with which you disagreed that you felt took away a bit of your identity as a European and a Scot. Now, does that not give us some insights into what that means for how do we bridge that divide? And I think that's a question for everybody, actually. I think it's a question of you're pro-independence or pro-union. I think that's why some of these questions are so raw. So I'm not comparing Scotland with Ireland in any way at all, but it is more complex in Ireland. I mean, but I don't think it would have much of an effect on our debate. I mean, it might add to political momentum, it might or it might not. There are two entirely different questions which will be decided by entirely different electorates. I think it's a really interesting question to ponder, but sometimes I wonder if the Irish, and again, it's not for me to comment, so forgive me to all our colleagues from Ireland who are on it, are a little bit further behind their discussions than maybe we are in Scotland, regardless of which side you happen to sit on. But I think there are a lot of lessons for us to take on board.
On the other hand, all right, maybe at the minute it's a bit slightly, there are one or two economic problems in the Republic, but basically the evidence is that since 1973, the EU membership has been nothing but a huge, colossal gain for the Irish,
phenomenal,
for the Republic of Ireland. Economically, it now has a per capita. I know these figures are kind of like dodgy in a way, but per capita kind of gross national income is huge. It's far bigger than that of the UK and far bigger than that of Scotland. And so therefore, if the Northern Irish were then to opt to join in that kind of growth thing as well, that might act as a kind of lodestar for us in Scotland, who would say, well, there's a proof of the pudding, because, as you said at the start, Stephen, and I think Eddie would agree as well, Brexit so far has led to a poorer Britain. I mean, we are now definitely poorer. Anyway, Eddie, what do you think?
No, all I was going to say, of course, Northern Ireland is actually growing. I think I'm right saying, I'll need to check this, but it's certainly amongst the most fastest parts of the United Kingdom.
It is. It's almost bigger growth.
Having been at the bottom for several years. I think I don't know. Like Stephen, I'm slightly unsure as to what would happen, because I think, if it was to be a narrow referendum victory in favour of reunification, then you do slightly worry what might happen on the back of that. But I think in the immediate term, I think the priority for Northern Ireland should be to get the institutions up and running as soon as possible. And I think that's got to be, hopefully, the priority of UK ministers, because I think it needs to be done before the end of this year if we're going to get some sense that stability and normality is returning. That's all I really have to say about Ireland.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of questions that which are really quite wide-ranging and philosophical almost, which is one from a Sue Diamond, who's asked several questions actually, and she talks about how what she regards as the UK's descent from democracy, and isn't this a false narrative that in its present state the UK would be allowed to rejoin or get it back into the EU without root and branch constitutional reform of its own, of which neither Labour or Tory have even the slightest intention of progressing? And indeed, Jay Phillips, I'm not certain who Jay is, but anyway, it could be someone, says that the Conservatives actually have only just begun this process, curbing protest rights and imposing voter ID. How does the UK? I think these are not quite. I think what the point being here is that in order, should we not rethink as the UK, certainly here, I mean, our whole constitutional settlement before we actually start thinking about rejoining the EU? That's the question.
Well, I mean, whether it's connected to the need to re-enter and rejoin the United Kingdom, then I don't know. But I think the answer is absolutely. I mean, if I can just do a very short plug, because
future, here we go.
Because that's certainly the view that our Scottish Future takes, that simply standing on the side of the status quo at the moment constitutionally is not where we should be. We think that most people in Scotland, and indeed most people across the United Kingdom, are looking for change. The country's far too centralised. I think that the kind of whites all knows best approach isn't working, and what we need to see is far deeper collaboration and a much more cooperative approach from Westminster and Whitehall to their approach to the devolved administrations, but also to the regions of England. So whether that, I don't think that has frankly any impact on Europe, but perhaps the end of the kind of Brexit wars, if you like, and the aftermath of a general election next year, if an incoming government just happens to be trying to do something relatively cost-free, then I think some kind of reshaping of and rewiring of the United Kingdom is long overdue, and I think is something that will appeal to a lot of people in Scotland who currently support independence, because they've frankly had enough of the way the UK operates. But also will appeal, I think, a lot to some of those people who supported Brexit, both in Scotland. Let's remember, people did support Brexit in Scotland, and in the rest of England, for whom the call for change and to take back control may not have been necessarily directed all at Europe, but was also directed at Westminster. So changing the way the UK operates, I think, is really important if we're going to actually come back together as a country, and rather than be divided between these two kind of camps that we've seen over the last 6 or 7 years. Plug over.
So, just to pick up, it's difficult to disagree with Eddie on a lot of his points there. I think Jane Phillips made a really good point, which is the sort of question of democratic institutions within the UK. It always struck me as something of an irony. I know we're amongst friends on the European question here, that that the only party that had unelected legislators during the Brexit negotiation was the United Kingdom. When you had people like David Frost, who are legislators for life, you cannot be a European legislator and not have some kind of democratic mandate, be it in the Council of Ministers or be it in the European Parliament. I know we all know that, but I just feel it's worth repeating every now and again. And that democratic deficit that Jane mentioned there, I think is quite important. You know, look, one of the reasons I think we left the EU was, and bluntly, I might believe in independence, but even those of us who are independence supporters are not disinterested in the democratic institutions in the United Kingdom that govern us. I think one of the reasons why we left the EU, and you've seen very right-wing policies coming out, is that because you've got this winner-takes-all election, you know, you've got a set of circumstances whereby Boris Johnson said had a landslide, and yet he didn't get that much more in the way of votes than Theresa May got, or winning, and actually didn't get that much more in the way of votes than Jeremy Corbyn in losing. So, and he takes that as a mandate. And also the other thing is, I know it was in the Westminster system previously when we debated and discussed what Brexit would look like, because of course nobody stipulated what it would look like before the referendum. It was very much the Conservative Party elected on a minority of votes with the DUP who set that course. You know, there was no need to debate and discuss across the chamber. And I think one of the issues where we've got this problem is that you do not have the checks and balances that adequately reflect the whims and the complication of different parts of the United Kingdom. So, for example, House of Commons is elected. Doesn't really matter what people in Scotland, Northern Ireland or Wales elect. It's done on the basis of what one constituent part of that union vote on. And then even if they do something, the House of Lords can't really challenge that because the House of Lords is unelected, and therefore, and I'm not saying there are lots of really good, worthwhile people in the House of Lords, but it has no democratic legitimacy to challenge a decision by the House of Commons. You can tinker, but you cannot challenge it. Also, because we have a state whereby we have an unelected head of state that you don't have in every country. Again, the head of state, you know, there is no condition on which the Queen as was, or the King now, would challenge what the House of Commons is doing, which means that these really significant constitutional decisions are being decided on who gets a plurality of votes in a general election, and that leads you to the extremes. Sorry, there's a bit of a rant, but I don't think this is inconsequential to the kind of Brexit that you have nowadays. And it was certainly one where you see that minority dictating what happens, and that's why checks and balances and complications are always much better, because they need to be more reflective of the population that they seek to serve.
Right. So Australia does, yeah. I mean, this whole sort of, I mean, this is now looking at a, you know, not only just rejoining the EU, but a kind of complete change of the British, you know, the British state, the UK state, and indeed, actually, many of us would think that an independent Scotland would have to look very different from the, you know, the current sort of setup, notably with a very highly centralised government, a Scottish government. That would have to change. Anyway. There is a question now, and I better put this because he's in charge of the behind the scenes here, which is Bill Rogers, is asking that a precondition for the EU being interested in a rejoin by either Scotland or the UK is that Tories will not simply put that, this is part of the first part of the posting, will not simply put the whole thing into reverse again. Does that argue in favour of a Scottish application as a country where the Tories, his words, not mine, are close to an endangered species?
Just on the last point, it's worth pointing out that the Tories are still the official opposition in Scotland. I mean, they have got 31 seats in the Scottish Parliament, and currently, I mean, polls suggest that may not continue. But I don't think it's right to say that they're an endangered species at all. I mean, I kind of alluded to this in my opening remarks that sorry, I hope I'm playing into your point here, that there is a risk that you could end up with a Labour government in the next 4 to 5 years. Whether it might not have a majority, it may do so. But if it were to simply, it is kind of meaningless for it to set about a whole plan to rejoin if the principal opposition party in the Conservatives, who will almost, at some point come back in, are committed to reversing that when they get back into government. Because, what is the point? This has to be something that sticks. Otherwise, we just end up in this endless ping pong. As somebody has said, okay, let's have another referendum, and then if rejoin wins that, let's have another one and make it best of 3. This is just simply not credible. Which is why, as I said in my opening comments, I think a better point here is to take those small steps that hopefully do bring people with you. As to whether Scotland is better off, doing itself, because, as you say, the Tory, there may be fewer, there are Tories, but I would guess the Tories in Scotland are probably more pro-European than they are in England. That again, it leads you back to the question of, well, is it a speedier route to plumb for independence, with all the complications that are going to come after that, with the border with England, which I think we haven't really discussed properly, which would be there. You take your choice on this one, I guess.
Right. Okay. Right, but you're right about the border, but I think that's worth frankly, that's worth a webinar in itself. The border is such a complicated issue. But I'm not even certain, actually, Steve. What is the SNP's position on that? Are we in favour of where do they stand, for example, on the Schengen and on the common travel area?
As I recall, and you're putting me on the spot on SNP policy, but I've been an elected politician for the SNP for a wee while now.
Oh, that's
the SNP is not in favour of Schengen, but that's also.
It was at one point.
Ireland is, well, no, I don't think it was, because it's talked about the common travel area. And obviously Ireland's not in Schengen. So it'd be very difficult, I think, for Scotland to be in Schengen and for Ireland not to be in Schengen. On the question of the border, and you're right, for a broader discussion, that's also a challenge in terms of the politics of this, because the UK, let's call it the rest of the UK's relationship with the European Union, keeps on evolving. And actually, the nature of the border will depend on how much divergence the rest of the United Kingdom wants to have with its biggest and most important markets in the rest of Europe. Now, I think that's an evolving question. And given the economic damage, it's very difficult to see on a long-term basis the rest of the UK continuing to throw up yet more barriers, because we see the impact that's having on our food and drink sector, on our education sector, on our manufacturing sector, you name it. So I think that is a live case, and something that is quite live. Eddie also made the point earlier on today that, of course, you might see the border in Northern Ireland pretty much disappearing. And so you start to see the basis for where some of that, not entirely, but some of that could be applied to between Scotland and England. But I think sometimes we ask for hard answers on the border when actually we don't know, because it'll be an external border of the European Union. At that point, I suppose it'd be similar if you're getting the ferry from Liverpool to Dublin or something like that. So that question of the border is a live one. How much divergence, how separate does the rest of the UK want to be from its biggest markets in Europe? And that seems to be something that I think will continue to evolve, just because it makes sense. On the point that Eddie makes, I do disagree a wee bit, unsurprisingly. I think as pro-Europeans, we must continue to make the case for rejoining the European Union. If you're pro-independence or pro-union, I think this is doing devastating long-term harm. And I think that we have a responsibility. I take the point about ping pong, which is why I think that if you were to reverse Brexit, certainly at a UK level, you'd need a referendum to do so, which was something, incidentally, that was advocated for by members of the Labour Party, including Keir Starmer, in the dying days of the 2017 to 2019 Parliament, they got behind that idea of having a second referendum at that point. But I do think that a significant debate and discussion needs to be had, which never happened before the initial referendum, because of course it came just 6 weeks after the London mayoral, Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly and other elections.
Okay. There's a question.
If I could just,
Yeah,
just very briefly, just come back on it. I think, not to sound too pompous, but I think I'm kind of trying to talk about the difference between, if you like, tactics and strategy here. And I think the strategy for me is, I want us back in the EU. You know, let's be clear about that. I'd like us back in the EU. The tactics around that are not to suddenly launch a campaign tomorrow saying, rejoin, let's join, come on. We made a terrible mistake. You Brexiteers were idiots. Let's get on with this. The tactics have got to be, to use the SNP's terminology, gradualist. That's all I really have to say.
Okay. Right. Thanks. There's a question from, bearing in mind, it's about nearly 7:10. Somebody's asking, if I can find it. Yes, it's somebody called Martha Matos Cholo, whose moniker here is Edinburgh Eastern, but that's not who she is. She says, "What should the Scottish?" I think this is mainly for you, Stephen. Again, what should the Scottish government doing now within their reach and devolved powers to make the rejoining process easier and quicker?
Yeah, I think I touched upon this briefly earlier. It's a good question. It's a fair question. You know, what Scottish government is, it has limited powers, but it can be doing something. So I think the things that I mentioned earlier on, I think some of the work that they've done, people like Michael Russell did previously as Cabinet Secretary, to try and minimise divergence. So in areas under the Scottish Parliament's control, to make sure that your, say, environmental policy, that your food and drink standards are as closely aligned to those of the rest of Europe as they possibly can be, to minimise friction. So first of all, that's some of the work that the Scottish government's doing, that's been passed by the Scottish Parliament, really important. I also think that in terms of, if you're looking at independence and you're producing some of the independence papers at the moment, is to look at what kind of institutions are you lacking. You know, if you're the day after, if it's the day after an independence referendum, what do you need? It's too late the day after an independence referendum. So I think you need to think about what are the institutions that you need, given that you've largely met the acquis communautaire, given the issues that might be issues elsewhere, like the rule of law and all these stuff, democracy, really important. Scotland's kind of met that. But the things it's not met, because it's not been an independent state, will be some of the institutions that other independent states already have. Look at, you know, is the environmental, so the environmental watchdogs, are they up to scratch? Do you need to do a little bit more? What do you need to do around central banks? What kind of, you know, what kind of diplomatic representations are you going to need, not just in Brussels, but in each of the 27 different member states as well? And finally,
beyond.
I'm beyond, of course. Yeah. I'm beyond, but Scotland would be looking at representation in Tallinn, for example, you know, not just Paris and Berlin, but places like Tallinn. And similarly, you get the incoming, you know, it goes the other way around, that you get a growth in diplomatic representation in Edinburgh as well. And finally, I think it needs to look properly at the Brussels office. They're doing great work, good people, really hardworking. Is it adequate? Do you need more of political representation out there? I think Angus Robertson's doing a good job. He's going over there. But, you know, is that as strong as it could be if you are an aspirant EU member state? And Scottish Government's policy is that Scotland is an aspirant member of the European Union. So maybe the office needs to reflect that further, albeit, you know, they've got very limited resources, and that's something that I accept.
Well, I think the key thing, one of the key institutions that you mentioned there, of course, is the central bank. And inevitably somebody's saying, should, you know, I mean, the currency option that the SNP, the Scottish Government, has been discussing is keep sterling for the time being. So monetary, you know, foreign currency would be in the hands of the UK. And then eventually move towards the Scottish pound or Scottish currency, whatever we call it. So And others say, well, should we? Somebody's asking. Grant Dunnery is asking, should the Scottish government consider Euro area membership, which seems like a huge leap forward. Personally, I'm in favour of it, but I mean I don't matter here.
But the thing is, and maybe it's a slight cop out, but I'll say it anyway because it's a statement of fact, which is if Scotland's independent and the people of Scotland vote for a political party to be in government that believes in the euro, then they will pursue euro membership. It is worth noting that the EU has never forced a country to join the euro against its will. So I think, again, we're trying to answer questions that actually, politics moves, as I know, as Eddie knows. And so it's very difficult to tell what the mood of the Scottish electorate may be in the aftermath of independence, or even say 10 years after independence as well. I think these things are difficult to predict, why it's good to discuss and debate the various options.
Have you got a view, Eddie, on this? Or is it?
I totally accept politics moves. I just think, and I do, but we also have to accept, the EU is a rules-based organization, as Britain has learned to its cost, throughout its slightly chaotic negotiation, and that it sticks to those rules. Now, I'm slightly contradicting. I may be slightly contradicting myself here, because I've suggested before that there may be some flex, down the line, and that Britain may benefit from, and indeed, who knows, Scotland may benefit from if ever there was an independent Scotland. But I still think you rub up against rules that are going to be quite difficult for Scotland to deal with. I mean, currency is just one. I mean, currency, forget about the EU issue for a moment, but I mean, currency for independent Scotland is still an unanswered question.
Yeah.
We've talked, there's the debt issue, again, rules being that certain, member states that are entering should only have a certain percentage of debt to GDP, which Scotland currently exceeds. And then, as I say, there is the border issue, and I'm prepared to accept that there is again some wiggle room that no doubt would apply, but it would be an external border of the European Union, and where there is no border at the moment, there would be some form of border. I just think that is the basic kind of academic consensus. It might, whether it's passports, probably not, but I think there would be some kind of goods border there that you would have to contemplate. And when Scotland has geographical disadvantages when it comes to attracting trade and business and industry to come and base themselves here, I'm sorry to say, that is another major problem when we are, when we're dealing with a part of the world that occupies the majority of our trade. So I just think, I don't want to get too kind of drawn and dug into this, but I think there are issues there that there will be some flex, I'm sure, because politics does move, as Stephen says, but I think there are rules too.
Yeah, well, actually, on that, I mean, that Stephen mentioned this about the kind of the Scottish government wishing to remain as aligned as possible. I mean, there is actually a Scottish Parliament tracker, which has been in place, which is tracking all that to see how far we and as Scotland per se, conform with the EU regulations. I'm afraid it doesn't look too good at the minute. Actually, it's been set up by an academic from Lisa from a Queen's University Belfast. Anyway, can I just say, because we're now approaching like 7:15, and I think Stephen, you actually have you got to go immediately, or are you kind of like, could you wait another 5 minutes or so?
Yeah.
5 minutes, okay, right. Well, basically, summing up, it's we've raised a lot of, both of you are quite optimistic, or you want to be optimistic and you want to be positive, and so on. But actually, if all the things we've discussed suggest that, bloody hell, it's going to be not easy, it's going to be bloody hard, it's going to be quite difficult, and frankly, it's going to take quite a long time if we're ever to rejoin the EU. Now, I'm assuming that for old buggers like me, no chance, I won't see it. If it's in 15 years' time, I'll be 90, whatever it is. So, Anyway, what realistically do you think is a time frame for Scotland being, whether as a part on its own, as a EU's 32nd member or whatever it's going to be, or as the or as part of the UK, actually being back in the EU? That's the final question.
Even shall I go first, or?
Yeah, you go first, Eddie. Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
I mean, I can't say, well, I think it would be 2020, 2037 in the case of an independent Scotland, and 2073 in the case of, to sum up, I think in both cases, as I said at the very beginning, you're talking about a long time. I think it'll be my teenagers' generation that will sort this out. And that's the kind of length of time that we're talking about here, because it does take, it takes time. I think the passage of time is it's a very difficult thing to pin down. You can't, there's no psephology here, or there's no political science to it. I think it is just about, people waking up one day and going, yeah, that was quite a long time ago. Do we really need to stand by it? So whether it's, in the union or out of the union, I think we're talking about, the next political generation sorting this. But to end on an optimistic note, my view is that the logic of Britain's place is for it to be in the European Union. It is simply the logical place for us to be. We're a significant nation within the European family of nations.
Yeah.
And I think that if you like, the kind of the gravity will come to play on it, and eventually, in time, we will be back in the European Union.
Okay, Stephen?
I take a slightly different view. I just think that the overwhelming evidence of how much damage this is doing day and daily is such, cost of living crisis. We know how much it was putting on food and drink, industries coming out, industries going under, cost of jobs, cost of our research. I can't think of an act of political damage that can be undone with political will that wouldn't have been undone at this stage. Now, Eddie's right. There are things to think about. It might take longer. From a Scottish perspective, so from a UK perspective, I think, let's say from a UK perspective, that you get Labour or even the Conservatives in power next year. And I think every day, the more and more evidence of the damage that this is doing, which seems to be almost irrefutable now, I think it becomes very, very difficult for a government not to do anything about it, be it Conservative or Labour. From an independent Scotland's perspective, I think that's a question of how quickly independence comes around. As I said earlier on, the politics of this is that if Scotland becomes independent, it will be driven, not entirely, but Brexit will not have been an insignificant part of that. In which case, I think it depends on how much work the Scottish Government are doing right now to ease that process. As I said earlier on, the quickest was Finland. 2 years and 9 months, and Finland had never been a member of the European Union before. Scotland has.
Yeah.
There are questions. Eddie's raised some of them. But I think a lot of it, the question of how long it takes post-independence depends on how much work you've done on the run-up to that particular vote.
Yeah.
There are things that can be done now.
And whether you're going to have parallel negotiations, for example, both on independence and on joining the EU.
I think you would. I mean, I can't see a set of circumstances whereby you just wait, because I think that any Scottish foreign minister will be spending, first port of call will be London to reassure a significant neighbour, but I think second port of call is going to be Brussels. So I can't see a set of circumstances whereby a Scottish government, is negotiating its independence with the UK and not opening up talks with the European Union. The European Union is engaged in talks with countries all over the world, and it would be almost inconceivable that they wouldn't start talking to the Scots the day after independence if that was the route that the Scots had chosen to go down.
Right. Okay. Can I just pass it? Thank you both very much indeed. I just want to pass over to Joe Goodburn, EMIS's Vice Chair, to thank you formally and make a plug for various things. So over to you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you both, Eddie and Stephen, very much for what's been a really, I think, rich and exciting debate. Because for a truly cross-party pro-EU organisation in Scotland, this is a very complex question to address. And as both speakers have said, it's also one that is really critical to Scotland's future. So I think I'm sure I speak for everyone who's been listening in tonight, that we very much appreciate this opportunity to debate with you both the various options and possibilities as you see them for the future. And while I have the floor, I would also just like to say to everyone who's been part of our discussion tonight, that if you've enjoyed the debate and you're not yet a member of the European movement in Scotland or the European Movement UK, we would really encourage you to please visit our website at euromovescotland.org.uk and hit the join button. And if you're feeling moved to more positive action at this point, beyond just pressing that join button, to try and keep our relationship with Europe that bit higher on the general public's agenda, then do please check out, well, there's the National Rejoin March website for the march being planned on the 23rd of September. Or as the Vice Chair who looks after all of EMIS's local groups, I would really encourage you to try and discover a local group in your area. I see there's a few Northerners on the call tonight, and towards the end of September, early October, we're going to be having a meeting up in Ullapool and relaunching the Highlands local group. So it would be great if you guys can come along and join us there. And the local groups help to publicise the need to, as Eddie said, keep the faith via small and sometimes some bigger steps. And I think from the questions that were on the list that we haven't managed to get round tonight, there's obviously interest in things like holding the government to account for why we haven't got anywhere with Erasmus, for holding the UK government to account for why Scotland's not being involved in many of the international discussions that are going on given our new status. So there's a lot of fun debates to get into, and local groups I think are really beginning to come back to life now that the tipping point of UK-wide positive relations has grown so much. And lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicise events surrounding something that's called Our Star. It's literally a big star, which represents the star that fell off the European flag when we left. It's the Star of European Unity and Peace. And following the Rejoin March on the 23rd of September, it's going to start a star trek right around the UK, and it's going to spend the second fortnight of November in Scotland. And the idea is that in each of its fortnightly zones where it's going to be in the UK, we'll have some form of sort of citizens debate about the future of that area of the UK and its relationship with Europe. So we'll be moving around Scotland, we'll be visiting all of our local groups, and we really hope that it'll reinvigorate people to take a bit more action in some of those bigger steps. So please look out for more information on this. And finally, I'd just like to thank you all very much for joining us this evening, and the many probing questions. I'm just sorry we couldn't discuss them all. And we certainly really hope to see you again soon, whichever area you were from. It was really lovely to see some of the people who've joined from the local groups in England saying, wow, this is a really interesting and open and level debate. So feel free to come back to our Scottish debates whenever you feel like it. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we could say clearly, actually, that Stephen and Eddie have had a conversation, not a confrontation. And actually, maybe this could be the start of something big. You know, we could do, you know, they could go on to become the kind of Asda Campbell and Rory Stewart, you know, de nos jours up here. So we're going to call it the Stephen and Eddie show from now on. All right. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. And we hope to see you both here soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. That was good.
Well done, everyone. Well done. Thanks to whoever. Yep.
We had over 100.
No,
We had over 100 at one point, so therefore that's quite good. As usual, 200 signed up and half of them turned up. Anyway, good.
You are still recording, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, Bill.
We are still recording, Bill. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, Eddie. Well, I'm sure we can edit at the end, but thank you very much. That was truly excellent. So thank you, David Gow, and thanks to speakers if they're there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joe. Great summing up at the end there. Thank you to my dog for not barking through it. And just one. Well, actually, no. I'll mention it. I'll send you an email later, guys. Just it's a small point about thing, but it was all positive as far as I'm concerned. So thanks a million. I'm going off to have some pizza. See you later. Bye.
See you later, folks. Bye. Bye.
Bye all. Good job.
Thank you. Bye. 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 Bye.